Yeah, in this video I'm going to show you how to take the motor off of a T1X2 and a T1V2, basically the same process. There's a few minor differences and I'll kind of touch upon those as we go, but this should give you a pretty good illustration of how to take the motor off as easy as possible. Okay, so here's an old T1X2 and it has problems with the motor on the right side. So I'm going to show you how to remove the motor on the right side, but basically it's the same thing on the left side. So I'm going to open up the cover and you can see the motor is right here. So we got the gearbox assembly, the motor, battery, electronics. So all we're concerned about with is the motor, gearbox assembly, getting that off right now. Yeah, first off, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take off the plastic covers on the side that you're taking the motor off of. So you've got 6 screws, and on this one they're older, so they're Torx screws. And then on the inside there's 3 screws. On the newer tugs they're actually Phillips, so you don't have to find a Torx screwdriver. So this one, I'm just going to pull these screws off real quick. Now what I need to do is take the track off. So to get the track off, the way that I found the easiest to do it is up in the front, up here. Just take a hammer and just smack one of the pins and it'll drive the pin right through and the little roto clip will fall right off. Once you have that done, then you can pull the pin out, set it aside, your track will come right off. I'm just going to set the track down below here. Now we're going to have to take this whole side rail off to be able to get the motor out. Sounds like a lot of work, but actually it's pretty easy. First off, what I'm going to do is I need to take this sprocket off right here. And to get that off, the screw is Loctited in place with green Loctite. So I'm going to have to apply heat to that for about 20 seconds. Otherwise I'm not going to be able to get that screw out. So I'm just going to apply heat here. Heat there, this should come right out, and it does. And I'm going to set this aside. Be careful, it's hot. I'm going to grab it with my pliers here. Oops. So set that right there to cool off. Now I can remove the sprocket, and remember it's hot. We just had a torch on it, so I'm going to put that there, and then there's a little key that is with it. I'm just going to take that key and set it there as well. Okay, the next thing I need to do is remove this top plate right here. So it's held on with 2 screws, and they should be blue Loctite, so they're relatively easy to remove. So I'm going to remove the one screw in the front and the other screw in the back, and that plate should come right off. There it is. Okay, now what I need to do is there are 6 screws holding the rail onto the main plate, and so these are a 3/16 Allen screws. I'm going to put a 3/16 wrench in there, and I'm going to loosen these up. These could be very tight. I'm going to try it this way first, but I have a little bit more leverage with another one if I need to, but I'm going to try it this way first. That was able to loosen there. I'm going to loosen them all a little bit first. coming out pretty good. These only have blue Loctite, but they're big screws, and you put a lot of blue Loctite on, sometimes they get pretty tight. So I'm going to loosen all 6 of them here, make sure that they're coming off okay. And looks like it's good. Okay, so now I'm going to remove the 6 screws completely. Okay, so I got all 6 screws out. Now I'm going to pull the rail off. And there's a couple bearings back here that go through the shaft that can be pretty close. So anyway, I got those off. Okay, so now I'm at this stage of the disassembly. Now I do have a bearing here that sometimes could be left in the rail, but it happened to be here on the shaft, so I'm going to take that out. And then the sprocket, and once I get that all the way off, then I'm going to remove the key and this little spacer that's on the back side here. Okay, now to get the motor gearbox assembly out, it's pretty easy, but this one that I'm working on here is an older one, and somebody has taken it and rerouted the wires a little bit. So usually there will be wires going along this bottom bracket right here, and they'll be zip tied onto this bottom bracket. You will have to snip those zip ties so that you don't have to remove all your wiring. And yeah, just snip those. And in this particular case, on this one, I do have to snip this zip tie that somebody put here. This is not the way it is in production, but I'm going to have to snip that one anyway. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and snip this one here. And that releases that wire. And then there's there's a bunch of loose stuff on this one, so I'm going to snip these wires, or this zip tie right here that's holding the 3 motor wires together. I'm going to remove these 2 large Phillips screws. This will make disconnect those wires a lot easier. So these screws were blue Loctited in, so they should be pretty easy to remove. Okay, so now I can disconnect those wires right there. So I've got the motor disconnected and the wires from the lights disconnected, and I'm pretty much ready to unscrew the motor from the bottom. There's 3 screws on the bottom, and remove those. Now to get to the bottom screws, it's really easier if I turn the tug on its side. But before I do that, I'm going to disconnect the battery and take it out. It lightens it up a little bit, and plus I just don't want to risk having something short out while I have it turned upside down. So to disconnect the battery, I'm just going to pull it out. Now there might be a zip tie on here, and it might be zip tied to this little hole right here. If it is, just cut the zip tie, unplug the battery, and you should be able to pull the battery right out. Okay, now to remove the motor on the bottom, I've got the tug sitting on its side, and I've got 3 Allen screws here that need to be removed. This one and this one are the shipping bracket screws, and they don't hold the motor on, so this one doesn't need to be removed. It might not even be on your tug when you look at it, but I'm just going to ignore that. If you don't have it, that's fine. If you do, don't worry about it. So now I'm going to remove these screws, but to remove those screws, those have been Loctited in, and they've got a very small Allen head socket on there. So I'm going to need to heat those up, or else there's probably a 75% chance I'm going to strip that head out. So I'm going to heat those up for about 15-20 seconds each, and then remove them. Let's see how that works, and be careful when you're doing this that you don't have the heat going places you don't want it to go. Okay, so that seems to be working good. Get that screw completely out of there. Remember, it's hot, so do not touch it. I'm just going to set it up here. And this other one was getting heat about the same time, so I think, yep, it's loose. There, and then the last one, go ahead and loosen up, and you can see that my motor is loose. Okay, now that my motor is completely loose, I can pull it out of here. And I'm going to have to turn it up at a little bit of an angle and just take it out, and there you go. The motor gearbox assembly is out. Now that we got the motor out of the tug, the motor gearbox assembly, I'm going to take the motor off of the gearbox. So first off, there is this bracket on the back that was used to hold some wires, and they're the wires from the lights. And I'm going to remove this bracket. This only has 3 screws here that just need to be removed. And they are blue Loctite, so it's pretty easy to remove them. So I'm going to remove those. And just remember where this is, so when you put it back together, you know how to do it. So I'm going to keep in mind that the wires on the gearbox are at the corner opposite the big radius. You can see from the end here that there is a big radius, and then there's a corner exactly opposite, and that's where the wires are. And so this bracket is, if I have the wires on the back side, top, the bracket's on the front, and that's on for the gearbox on the right side. On the left side, it's going to be exactly opposite. So anyway, just take note of how the bracket is oriented, and then you're going to reinstall it the exact same way, obviously. So I'm going to take these screws out. Now, as you're taking these screws out, there are some spacers, little plastic spacers behind the screws, or behind the bracket, that's between the bracket and the gearbox. So once I get this apart, I want to make sure I don't lose those little spacers, because I got to put those back in. Okay, so you can see the little spacers fell out here, and there's one still on the back. I'm just going to leave it there. Set those aside, and now I'm ready to take the gearbox apart. Okay, to get the motor off, I've got to remove this back plate. And to remove this back plate, I've got 3 screws. They're Allen screws that need to be removed inside of the from the front side of the gearbox. So I've got the Allen wrench in there. This one is a bit on the short side, but I think I can make it work. So I'm going to remove these screws. And yeah, if you have a little bit longer T-handle, it will be a lot easier. Okay, so I got that one off. And I'm going to remove this one. These are blue Loctited as well, so they can be pretty snug. And now I'm going to remove this one. Now, when you get 2 of them off, you don't have to worry about anything falling apart, but The third one, once you get it loosened up, this is going to start wanting to separate. So just beware, you don't want the thing to fall apart, you want it to stay together as you pull the last screw out. What you might do is just loosen all the screws a little bit so that you don't have to really crank on them, and then remove 2 of them, and then that third one, you know, you already got it loosened, so it should come out pretty easy. So you notice I'm kind of holding this thing together while I'm taking it apart. So now I've got all 3 screws, and I can actually remove those. And now I'm going to remove this back plate, but I don't want to just yank it off because there is some there's some stages inside of the planetary gearbox here that could come out with it. And if those come out and fall apart, you might have a problem putting them back together. It's a lot easier to leave those in there for reassembly than if you have to reassemble all that. So I'm going to pull this apart very slowly, carefully, and I'm looking to make sure that those intermediate gearbox gear assembly is not coming out. You can see I've got a bunch of planet gears in there, and I want to leave those in place. So I don't want to turn this upside down, or those will all fall out, and then I got to put them back in, and it just ends up being a bigger project than what you anticipate. Now there's a little spacer here, and that spacer might have stayed inside the gearbox. If it didn't, go ahead and put it inside the gearbox to keep it, and that'll be fine just like that. Okay, so now that I've got the motor and the plate off of the gearbox, I can remove the motor. And this is pretty easy. I need to use a 2.5 millimeter Allen wrench and remove the 4 screws that are holding it in place. So I'm removing them one at a time. And these are the only metric screws in the whole process that you need. The rest of them are all inch. So we'll get those off of here. And then I'm going to just, while those screws are still in there, I'm just going to take it off and set it aside. So now I've got the motor and the pinion gear, and there's a little spacer here as well, aluminum spacer. Now this pinion gear is just pressed on, so I should be able to get it off. I don't know how much force it's going to take to get it off. Let me see here. Yep, this one comes off pretty easy. There is a key in there, so I don't want to lose that key. And the motor is very magnetic, so if you drop any of the metal pieces inside there, they're going to stick, and it's going to become very difficult to get them out. You're going to have to fish them out with, you know, very fine needle nose pliers or something. So the best idea is to make sure nothing goes inside the front or the back. If you have a little screw sitting on the table and you set the motor down, it can get sucked up in there by the magnet, and that'll cause you problems later unless you remove it. Okay, so I'm going to take this pinion gear off carefully, and I'm going to leave the little aluminum spacer on there. So the pinion's off, set that aside. Now there's a little key here. I'm going to pull that off. Now I might have to use some pliers or something to pull that out, but anyway, I got that out pretty easily there. And now I'm taking this spacer off. So there's my motor assembly, and now I can replace it with a new motor. Okay, now I've got the new motor ready to be installed. So what I have done is I've cleaned up the back plate a little bit, got some of that extra grease off of there, took the screws, and there's a little lock washer on the screw as well, cleaned those off, got all the grease off of them, and ready to reinstall the new motor. So I've got the little aluminum spacer. I need to put that on, and then I need to put the key in to the keyway. And again, you want to make sure you don't drop it into the magnets of the motor. And now, got that pretty well. Yeah, needs to be in there snug. Okay. Not cooperating. There we go. Okay. And now I'm going to put the pinion back on. And again, it might take a little bit of a tap. Sometimes it's a little bit of a press fit. Usually it's not very tight, but in this particular case, this one's relatively loose, and that's okay as well. So now I'm going to reinstall the back plate, and the back plate gets connected on so that you've got the wires of the motor exactly opposite of the big radius. So you can see the big radius and the wires are over on this side. So I'm going to take my screws now, and then I've got blue Loctite, Loctite 242. It's a removable Loctite. There's other brands you can use as well, but this is what we use. So I'm just going to put a dab of blue Loctite on the screw, and then I'm going to insert that into the hole and get it started. I'm not going to snug it up yet, I just got it started. I'm going to do that for all 4 of the screws. Get those started. Once I get them all in place, I'll go around and re-snug them up all the way. Okay. Last screw. Make sure you put those lock washers in there as well. Okay, so now they're all in there loose. I can still so I'm kind of trying to center this as good as I can. I don't want it like turned one way or another. I want it kind of in between. So now I'm just going to snug up these screws one at a time. Just get them snug. I'm not actually tightening them yet all the way. So snugging them up. And now I'm going to give it one last little crank to get them tight. Alright. Now I'm ready to put the back plate motor back onto the gearbox, but before I do that, I want to put a little bit of grease on my pinion gear. So I'm going to take some gear grease and put it on the pinion and just kind of spread it around on the pinion. This will prolong the life of your gearbox immensely, so make sure you do this. And get that on there. Okay, that should be good. Alright. Now I'm going to reinstall the motor pinion into the gearbox. Now this is somewhat tricky. Now you do have a radius side of the gearbox back plate, and then you have the radius side of the front plate. Those two have to match up. So when I'm putting this in, I need to get the gears to mesh inside of the planetary gears that are inside there. So it takes a little bit of finagling, but you do end up getting it after a little bit. And there we go. Okay, so I got those in. I've got the two, and I'm holding everything together right now. So I've got the two radius sides on the same side. So now I'm ready to put my screws back in place. So once again, I'm going to kind of clean off the end of these screws. Do all of them real quick here. Don't need the grease anymore. And I'm going to apply just a drop of blue Loctite insert the screw and tighten that down with my wrench. Okay, so that's snug. So now what I want to do is I need to get the flat surfaces to be flat on both, you know, on the front plate and the back plate to each other. So to do that, I'm going to set it on a very flat surface, and I've got it set on this surface here, and now I'm going to snug up the rest of the way these screws, keeping it flat. So I'm going to get it just snug, and then I'm going to go around and tighten it the rest of the way so that it's not going to move. Okay, got that tight, and this is ready. Now what I'm going to do is reinstall my bracket. And my bracket, wire bracket. Now, before you reinstall this, you might want to go ahead and put your zip ties into here before you put them on, and that'll save you a lot of time. So I found the best way to put the zip ties in there is to, okay, so this is going to be the up side of the assembly inside. So I put the clasp part, or the solid part of the zip tie, up on the top, and then I'll go ahead and feed this in just a little bit and get it maybe the first click right there. Okay, and then I'm going to do the other one the same way. That way they're all ready. I can actually feed my wires through the loop when I've got the thing all assembled up on the tug, and I'm rerouting the wires. I can just feed them through these loops and then just pull the zip ties to tighten them, and everything's in place. It makes it a lot easier. So zip ties are in place. Now what I need to do is get all 3 screws with the spacers in place. So I'm doing that right now. Got 3 screws and spacers in place, and I'm going to put a little blue Loctite on each one of the screws, and then put them into the holes on the gearbox. There you got it. The gearbox motor assembly ready to go. I've got my zip ties all in place so that I can feed my wires, and everything is working good. So this is ready to go. Now I'm going to reinstall the motor gearbox assembly into the tug. So to do this, you want to make sure that you have the back radius part of the motor gearbox, actually it's the gearbox, but the motor gearbox assembly, to the bottom back of the tug. So I'm just going to slip it in here the exact same way I took it out. Slip it in between the wires here and get it situated up against this front. And then I've got 3 screws, remember, that I took out of there. I'm going to apply a little bit of Loctite to those screws, and this is blue Loctite. And I'm going to put them in just snug with my fingers just to get the first thread or so. I'm going to do that to all three of them. And you kind of feel your way around, or you can go underneath and both lay down underneath it and look. So Loctite. And the third screw. And get it installed. So remember, there's two in the outward location and then one in the back location. And then there's one or in the inward location, and there's that screw that's on the outside that is on the bottom there for the shipping bracket. So don't let that confuse you. So now I'm going to take the Allen wrench and tighten these screws up. Okay, now my motor gearbox assembly is actually installed, and I'm ready to start connecting up wires. To connect up the wires, what I've got to do is take the 3 wires that come out of the speed control, which is right here, and I'm going to connect those up to the motor before I put the little bracket on. So yellow goes to yellow, black goes to blue, and orange goes to orange or red, whatever shade that is. Now I'm going to hold the little plastic bracket in place. I've got to put a little Loctite on the screw. I can either put Loctite on the screw or down in the hole. In this particular case, I'm going to put it in the hole. Screw in place and just snug that up. Get one screw going and the other screw. And tighten it up very snug. And that's it for the wires from the motor. Okay, now I'm going to reinstall these sprockets onto the shaft. So first off, there's this aluminum spacer that needs to go on the shaft. And then I do have a key that needs to go on the keyway. And it's best if you orient the keyway in the up position. So you can do that just by rotating the motor around till the keyway is in the up position. And now I'm going to put the sprocket on. And it's going to go right on the shaft here and line up with that keyway, and that is on and ready to put the rail assembly on. Okay, now I'm going to reinstall the rail. So I'm going to put that, make sure that you get the bearing installed on the inside of the rail, and I'm going to put that in the shaft and then push it on through. Then make sure that the mounting brackets are fully seated down onto the main plate. Now I'm going to put these 6 screws back in. I'm going to have to use blue Loctite on them. Okay, now I need to install the top cover plate again that I had removed. So I'm going to replace this. And once again, this takes blue Loctite. And there's 2 screws, so I'm going to put those in. Okay, so those are good and tight. I need to put the outer sprocket on, so I need to replace the key on the shaft and then put the sprocket on. Now, there is a slight interference sometimes with the sprocket and this bottom bearing down here. So it might be necessary to rotate the sprocket a little bit so that it goes on there. Okay, looks like it's going good. Now I need to put the outside cover on. And this one takes green Loctite, so I'm going to put a little bit of green Loctite on this screw here. And then screw that into the end of the shaft. And tighten that in real good. Okay, so now I need to reinstall the tracks. So basically what I'm going to do is the exact opposite of what I did when I was taking them off. I need to get the tracks lined up, and actually in the front here is the easiest place to work with joining them back together. So I'm going to get the joint up to the front. And that might take a little bit of maneuvering to get that to happen. Get things to line up perfectly. And if your tracks came off pretty easily, then it should go back on pretty easily as well. So I need to get these lined up in the front here. Looks easier than it is. Now, it might be necessary to loosen your tracks. You can see how to install the tracks from the owner's manual, but this pair went right back on the way they came off, so it's pretty straightforward. And now all I need to do is put the clip in there, and you get a little brass tool with your tug. It's in the spare parts, and this is a different one. This is one we have for production, but the brass tool just holds the clip, and then you just flip it into the end of the pin, and now your track's assembled. We're just about wrapping it up here. The last thing to do then is to put the side covers back on. And it's just kind of the reverse of what we did when we took them off. We got 6 screws. And we still need to install the battery. So the battery just goes right back in the way it came out, and just plug it in, and that's good to go. Now it is completely done.